Hello everybody, continuing our Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion content. I wanted to do one on the classes that are present in Oblivion, of course. In the remake, as far as I could tell, none of the classes changed in any really meaningful way. So I figure I would start off with that. Because I'm sure a lot of people who are newer to the game are just going to go with one of these classes, and I wanted to go over which ones I think are best for each sort of play style. And things like that, of course. Pick whatever you want for your character, but some of them just feel a little bit backwards, and I wanted to give out, a bit of a welcome mat to new players, because I'm sure, like many Oblivion players that have been playing since the original, like me, you know that even on, like, Adept, this game can get to be quite difficult if you aren't careful. Even with the changed around stats, you're still going to be, this isn't going to be fully baby mode. It's an Elder Scrolls game, and every Elder Scrolls game is incredibly easy to end up cheesing, but still, I like to just talk about things like this. So there's, what is this? Good handful of classes in the game, going in alphabetical order. Let's start. So first up we have the Acrobat. The attributes which they specialize in are agility and endurance, so extra, so slightly more fatigue, but also more damage with short swords, daggers, and like bows and arrows. And endurance means more health off the bat. In the Oblivion remaster, endurance levels do apply retroactively, so you don't have to be super frightened and put all your points into endurance early to get the most health. But still, it's good to not have to put as many levels into endurance, as it isn't a direct damage skill. And then in terms of their major skills, we start off with acrobatics, so more jumping. With the boost to acrobatics, it shouldn't be too long before you can literally jump along the surface of water, which is just a really cool perk, honestly. Blade, which is of course going to be useful, as you'll be quite good with daggers and short swords, as they are now agility weapons. Block is always just kind of handy to have, so you can reduce damage taken, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties. Marksman, of course, is quite fun in Oblivion. I find it a lot more engaging than I do in Skyrim, so always good to have that on tap. Security is handy if you aren't going into magic, as the lockpicking in this game is a lot... it's not as easy as, say, Oblivion or any of the Fallout games, where once you've mastered one of those games, it's stupid easy to do any lock, as long as you have the lockpicks. In this game, it takes a bit more finesse. Personally, I just use alteration magic to unlock locks in Oblivion, but it is handy to have security be higher, just so things are a little bit easier. Sneak is, of course, always good in just about any game you can sneak in, and it's nice to have the boon to that to get your better sneak attacks off early. And Speechcraft, which is useful to get to be on better terms with people, which is useful for a lot of quests where people will only talk to you if they have a high enough disposition. I'd say this class on the whole is probably somewhere around... Honestly, I think it's quite a good class. Even though it doesn't lean into magic, which is the easiest way to break this game, I still think it's quite solid, just because sneaking with a bow and arrow is pretty much always effective in just about any game that you can do it in. And being able to jump around is very fun. I'll give it probably a B, because it's very solid, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other classes. I just think it's a good choice if you're going for a character like this. And no armor specialization is interesting. It'd be a good class to pick if you want some combat prowess early in the game, but want to level up your magic skills over time, as you probably won't be wearing armor if you're using this class, which is a completely valid strat in Oblivion, by the way. You can enchant your clothes to have shield or spell absorption, things like that, to make your clothes just as good as any armor. Though personally, I prefer heavy armor just because it looks cooler. Next up, we have the Agent, which is another stealth-specialized class. They specialize in agility and personality, which is an interesting enough combination. Personality, of course, governs mercantile, so the prices you'll be getting with buying and selling things, which is always very handy. And agility is going to be, again, fatigue, short weapons, bow and arrows, that general family, as well as your overall sneak ability. Unsurprisingly, the skills here are pretty similar, actually. We start with acrobatics, so better jumping, always handy. We have illusion, which is pretty good. Illusion magic is pretty nice in Oblivion, again, with chameleon and things like that. Marksman, again, very satisfying to use bow and arrow in Oblivion. Mercantile is always handy to have as a bonus skill, just so you're not really struggling for gold for the first 5 or 6 levels. Past then, you'll start finding a lot of enchanted stuff, and gold won't be as much as an issue. But even still, you'll get more money. You'll be a lot richer with a higher starting mercantile. Security, as I mentioned, already quite useful. Sneak is, of course, always good, and speechcraft is handy enough to have. Though I think it's a little bit redundant to invest in both mercantile and speechcraft, but that's irrelevant, really. Agent, I think, is very, very similar to Acrobat, just with a bit more magic focus, which I think is a totally worthy trade-off. And while I'd say endurance is a better attribute to specialize in than personality, personality still has its value, just so you're saving little bits and pieces of gold on bribing or on time with the persuasion minigame. So I'm going to give Acrobat, I think, it's probably going to be a low A tier, personally. Next up, we have the Archer, and this one probably won't come as any surprise. We have Agility and Strength as its favorite attributes. Strength is going to govern things like axes, maces, swords, long swords and great swords specifically, or claymores. And then its skills are going to be Armorer, one of the most useful skills to get up very early. Well, it'll take maybe a few thousand gold and quite a bit of time taking damage to your armor or disintegrating it with magic. Once you reach 100 Armorer, you will never have to pay for repairs again, which is just really, really useful. Because that's a huge money sink, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties, where you're very likely going to be running through armor and weapons very quickly. Then you have Blunt and Blade, which is actually interesting. Usually when I'm playing Oblivion, I specialize into one or the other, but having the option to simply take whichever weapon is stronger is definitely very powerful. Blunt is going to be hafted weapons, so axes, maces, warhammers, and then Blade will be for anything that is short-handled, so swords, great swords, daggers, and short swords, though those are governed by agility, which this guy does specialize in. This guy, despite being called an archer, actually has the makings of a very, very good all-arounder. Hand-to-hand is a pretty solid skill tree here, as you just get to have a weapon that never fails you. You can just slug on enemies and knock them unconscious, which is really useful. Light armor is, of course, nice just to have some protection without giving up too much mobility. Marksman is, of course, very satisfying, and Sneak is very good. Archer, honestly, in terms of non-magic classes, is probably one of my all-time favorites, not even just for archers, but just for general combat. You get to basically use any kind of weapon in the game that isn't magic. So, you'd have to go out of your way to use magic, but since you're already good with Blade, Blunt, and Marksman, you don't really need anything else. That covers every weapon category. Archer is just a very, very solid class in my opinion, and even though I tend to lean more towards magic or hybrid builds, I think Archer has a great place as just a really solid combat class. Next up we have Assassin, which specializes in, of course, stealth. In terms of attributes, it's intelligence and speed. Speed is definitely nice. You can get to be very fast in this game, so speed is always just really handy to have more of without having to put too many points into. Intelligence is an interesting one. We'll get into that in a moment, though. In terms of skills, acrobatics, jumping is always handy, and also taking less fall damage. I hadn't mentioned that, but taking less fall damage is very nice. Alchemy is very solid. You can make some very crazy potions in this game, though it really gets out of hand when you start to apply things like weakness to poison. And things like that, then you really get into it. Though you don't, unfortunately, have, I believe it would be Destruction or Alteration as one of your skills. Next up, you have Blade, so again, daggers, short swords, swords, though you don't have any attributes specifically for any of those weapons. Then light armor is always handy. Marksman and security and sneak we've covered many times already. Overall, I think Agent is, or Assassin, sorry, not Agent, that's a different class. Assassin is just a bit of an oddball. It's weird to have intelligence as one of your attributes without having at least one school of magic under your skills. Personally, if you wanted to go for like a very smart, witty assassin, I would make a custom class very similar to this, but maybe bring mysticism or illusion or something like that, just so you can make more use of your naturally higher magicka. I think assassin is just a bit of a mismatched, random, garbled class. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I still think you can get the job done, but I think you'd be better with any of the three classes we already mentioned. I'll be giving this guy a D tier. Next up, we have Barbarian, and this one probably won't be too surprising. He specializes in combat. His attributes are speed and strength, so you're going to be moving faster and hitting harder. His skills include armor. I've already mentioned how armor is one of the greatest return on investments you can have, especially for very long playthroughs. Athletics is useful for running faster. One of my favorite skills to take, just because what's better than getting around the world faster? Blade, block, and blunt gives you all of the melee skills effectively, including hand-to-hand actually. With block, you can be skilled with both one-handed and two-handed weapons without giving up too much benefits of either. And you can use anything you come across. That's the benefit of taking blade and blunt, is having, if you find a really good enchanted sword, you can use that. If you find a really good enchanted axe, you can use that. When you specialize into one or the other, like blade, I could find a really good mace in my playthrough and be like, this thing's awful because it only does 3 damage because I've got like 5 in blunt. So Barbarian, I think, is a solid... Ooh, sounds like the garbage truck is outside doing something. Light armor, though, is also handy. Just doesn't slow you down very much. I think Barbarian's a solid enough class if you want to go pure melee might with just high speed, high damage. It might struggle on higher difficulties, but I'd say that this is, again, a solid class. I'm going to be giving him an A tier. Next up, we have Bard. This stylish young man is specialized in stealth, and their attributes are intelligence and personality. An interesting enough combo, though I think this guy does benefit from it. Of course, being a Bard, you'd want to be very personable. In terms of skills, you have Alchemy. I've already mentioned you can make some insane poisons in this game, as well as very good potions. I shouldn't neglect potions. They're very good. Blade and Block, so you can be quite competent with a sword and shield. Illusion, which is a very nice skill of a nice school of magic for, again, things like invisibility, and among others like that. Light armor will slightly ruin your spell effectiveness down to 95% once you get to a high enough level with it. But still, I think light armor is, again, a solid choice, especially if you're not going into alteration. Mercantile is useful, again, just to stay richer the entire game, and Speechcraft is, again, handy for quests where you need to actually talk to people, which are more common in this game than, say, Skyrim, if you're new from Skyrim. Overall, I'd say Bard is a fine class for people who don't care much for the finer points of combat in this game. You can craft insanely strong poisons to deal with anyone you have to kill with alchemy and decent intelligence. You can slip out of combat as well as use illusion to change the way people think with your high intelligence, and personality is just handy to have better prices around the board. If you're someone who really thrives just talking to people and making combat as quick and painless as possible, I think Bards do the job just fine. Though I don't think they're anything outstanding, I'll be giving them a B tier. Next up, we have the Battle Mage, a personal favorite of mine. The Battle Mage, of course, specializes in magic. The attributes are intelligence and strength, so really going into a high, sort of burn fast and bright kind of stat spread with that. In terms of skills, they have Alchemy. I've already spoken my piece. Very handy to have. Alteration, which is really good, especially if you're not using armor, as you can simply cast shield spells on top of using enchanted armor. Blade, Blunt are both useful, as I've mentioned, for being able to switch easily from weapon to weapon, and will help you level up both of them pretty relatively easily. And then Conjuration, my personal favorite school of magic, is just fantastic in Oblivion. It's almost essential when playing on higher difficulties, and is also just super fun to have a little minion with you. Destruction is very nice. Again, a lot of great spells are in Destruction, so it's good to have that jack of all trades there. And then Mysticism is very important for enchanting, as that is actually what Soul Trap falls under. It's a mysticism spell in this game, so you'll need some mysticism if you're going to be running enchanted weapons. Which, again, if you're playing on higher difficulties or you're getting to a high level, eventually you will have to use soul gems, and you can't just rely on Varla stones because there's no way to get an infinite amount of them. So I think the Battle Mage is a very, very solid magic class, just the whole way around. Granted, I think most of the magic classes in this game are solid, but I'm going to be giving him an S tier. I'm actually going to put him above the Archer, just because the Archer's the jack of all trades in combat. The Battle Mage can basically do everything he does, but make it more powerful, through the use of magic, of course. Next up, we have the Crusader, who, of course, specializes in combat. He has Strength and Willpower as his main attributes, which are Both handy. Willpower, of course, gives you increased stamina and magicka regeneration, which is useful if you're using magicka sparingly, so you can use it in one big burst and recover it faster with, say, a very strong healing spell, which will be very useful with the skills included. Athletics, of course, determines how fast you move, which is always very good. Blade and Blunt are very useful to have both of if you don't want to specialize down one to keep yourself flexible. Destruction is a great school of magic to have on hand. Hand-to-hand is again useful should you not have a great armorer skill and you're out in the field. Heavy armor is of course my favorite class of armor, so they get bonus points for that. And Restoration allows you to do things like fortify your skills as well as heal yourself. I'd say this guy is a very solid tanky class sort of way to go, as you can use Restoration to keep yourself very healthy for an extended period of time. And with his willpower, he should be able to cast a lot of spells that are generally a bit weaker. So you could also lean into something like Alteration, even though it isn't inside your main attributes, to really get the most out of this class, to have some extra shield. Mysticism would be another one that could be interesting, just to keep yourself armored up with something like Spell Absorption. I'm going to be giving this guy an A tier, personally, just because I think that he's not quite as cool as the Battle Mage. That's the main thing. I think this is still a great class. Basically, any class above C tier I think is very solid. Just this is where Crusader falls for me. Healer is up next, and unsurprisingly, this guy specializes in magic. He uses personality and willpower as his attributes, which is an interesting enough combo. Means you'll get better prices and your magicka will regenerate more quickly, which can be useful at high levels just to keep spamming heal spells, because of course this guy does specialize in Restoration, but also Alchemy, Alteration, Destruction, Illusion, Mercantile, and Speechcraft. Alchemy is very useful, so he can always have a supply of pre-made potions, which are very good, as well as using Alteration to keep himself safe through either shield spells or things like Spell Absorption. Or actually, Spell Absorption Alteration? No, I believe it's just Shield. Regardless, Shield is a very good spell to have on hand, especially on higher difficulties. They'll be doing a lot of damage to you, so reducing that in any way you can is very useful, especially when you're probably not wearing armor. Alteration, as I mentioned, is very good. Destruction is great. Illusion is very handy for avoiding combat, which this guy does want to do. But with Destruction, you can usually wipe out a single enemy in very, very short order. And with how good your Alchemy is, you should be able to just down a few potions of magicka and then fry his buddy with another spell. I'd say the Healer is a solid enough class, if nothing outstanding. I'll be giving him an A tier. Next up, we have the Knight. Of course, the most noble of all combatants, with some really cool artwork, admittedly. This guy specializes in personality and strength. A solid enough combo means he'll be quite good at having an easy time talking to people, as well as hitting very hard in combat. In terms of skills, he has Blade, Block, and Blunt, so again, the melee trifecta, including hand-to-hand, so if you ever need to, you can simply fall back on these hands to beat your enemies to death. Heavy armor is very useful to stay in the fight for an extended period of time, and then interestingly, he actually specializes in Illusion and Speechcraft. Speechcraft is not surprising, but Illusion definitely has some powerful spells you can use to not only make up for your shortcomings in mobility, for example. You could use, you could use invisibility spells or things along that line to make sure you are very, very flexible. You can also use this to fortify your speech even higher, and the most powerful, perhaps, is, of course, the unmentioned so far paralysis spell. A knight could simply smack an enemy with a paralysis spell and then wail on them, and with how high their damage is going to be with any weapon, they should be able to take them down with relative ease. Illusion is very powerful, of course. I'm going to be giving the knight an S tier. Personally, I think he's just very strong. For melee combatants and people who want to use heavy armor, I'd say he's as equal to the archer is for people who want to use light armor. Though, of course, Illusion does give them the edge of being able to smack enemies with paralysis spells, which is just really powerful. Next up, we have the classic, the Mage, the Wise Mystic. This guy specializes in magic, unsurprisingly, and his attributes are intelligence and willpower. He'll have higher magicka and regenerate magicka much quicker. In terms of skills, it's perhaps unsurprising, it's basically all the magic skills. Alchemy is useful to keep up your supply of restore magicka, potions. Alteration is very useful for keeping yourself safe through things like, again, shield spells, among others, as well as modifying your own, what's the word I'm looking for? Modify your own stats, as well as effectively bypassing the security, as you can use open spells to open any lock in the game, so long as your spell ability is high enough. Conjuration to keep yourself safe with a big bodyguard, something like a Daedroth or perhaps a Dremora, are invaluable for the concerned mage who is worried about their body. Destruction is just always useful as a workhorse skill, and eliminates the need for any other ranged combat, as you can simply smack enemies with a few weakness to magic spells, and then hit them with a fireball so powerful that they won't be able to even be recognized as a person anymore. Illusion is useful for getting out of sticky situations, and again, should a scary enemy, like a bandit warlord in full Daedric armor get up to you, you can smack him with paralysis, run back and recover your magicka, re-summon up whoever summon you're using, and then start pelting him with magic spells as he gets back up. Mysticism is very useful for, again, soul trapping, which is essential for keeping any enchanted weapons you're using filled, and of course, since you are in the way magic works in this game, you likely will be using something like a dagger to keep yourself safe, or perhaps a short sword, so it is useful to have an enchantment on that, for example, Drain Magicka. And then Restoration is just always useful to keep yourself healthy as well as modifying your skills. I think the Mage is easily an S tier, just because magic is insanely good in Oblivion, and being skilled in every kind of it means that there's really no situation you can't use magic to get your way out of. The Monk is up next, and he specializes, actually, in stealth. His main attributes are, of course, agility and willpower, an interesting combination. That means he'll have very high fatigue, as agility and willpower are the skills that feed both of those. In terms of skills, acrobatics are useful for getting around the map, alteration is useful for keeping yourself safe as well as bypassing security, athletics is generally useful just for moving very quickly, so you'll have a very, very speedy character here. Hand-to-hand is very solid because, again, every time you punch someone, you lower their fatigue and you can knock them down and just keep wailing on them in a sort of right in from Metal Gear style, for my Metal Gear Solid fans out there. Marksman is, of course, just very satisfying to ping off arrows. Actually having to lead your shots and things like that is very fun. Unfortunately, this guy has security as a skill, which I think is slightly redundant with alteration. Alteration can not only fulfill a lot of other roles, but with unlocked spells, which are very cheap for how good they are, you can simply bypass security as a skill. And Sneak is the final one, which is very handy. This is a very solid class, spare security, and I believe I could give it a B. Will I give it an A? I'll give it an A tier, just because I think it's quite solid. Again, this would be good on someone like a Khajiit, who have the bonus to their unarmed damage, as well as the fact that all these skills play quite well with what Khajiit want to do. But anyone that wants to be a flexible, ranged, and melee specialist without using weapons, so you don't have to worry about things like armorer, you should have no issue just picking the Monk and going ham on your main skills. Though I wouldn't really bother with security, again, as you can just use alteration to unlock anything in the game. Next up, you have the Nightblade, who specializes in magic. His attributes are speed and willpower, and in terms of skills, he of course has acrobatics, as so many of these classes do, and athletics. I've already spoken my piece on those. They're handy enough to have as starting skills, even though you'll level them up pretty much all the time. Simply starting off as being faster is very useful, and also gives you access to the dodge mechanic much sooner. Alteration is, of course, very useful for simply getting through locks, keeping yourself safe, and other such applications. Blade is quite good, especially with the smaller weapons. Whoops, sorry. Just knocked my Warhammer clippers off my desk. Blade is very useful just to use a fast-swinging weapon. Destruction is always useful to have on hand and is a great complement to your blade. You can carve up enemies at close range or soften them up with fireballs and similar such attacks at range before finishing them off. Light armor will slightly reduce your spell effectiveness, but that's not really the end of the world, as it will just keep you more safe, and with alteration you can of course stack damage reduction on top of your armor to be very resilient. And then restoration is just always a useful school of magic to have in your back pocket. The Nightblade is definitely a solid stealth class, and probably one of my favorites actually. I'm going to place it next to the Agent, as I feel like he's just a slightly better agent given the fact that he trades out his personality skills, which while useful, tend to lose effectiveness as the game goes on, as you'll simply have more gold to bribe people. The Spellblade also leads into the magic, which is a very, very powerful thing to lean into in Oblivion, sorry. Sorry, Skyrim Magic, you're just not the same. Next up, we have the Pilgrim. These guys are going to be specialized in stealth, interestingly enough, with the attributes of endurance and personality, which gives them, of course, bonuses to those two stats. Endurance means you'll have more health all the time, which is just generally useful. and personality means you'll generally have more magic or more money to work with. In terms of skills, they have armor, block, blunt, light armor, mercantile, security, and speechcraft. A bit of a average spread. Of course, with block, blunt, and light armor, you have the makings of a solid skirmisher, and with armor, you won't have to spend any extra money, at least too often, to repair things. Mercantile is just useful with your higher personality to stay richer. Security, though, is very handy to have if you're not going into magic, which this guy doesn't particularly do, and speechcraft is just useful to get through personality checks easier. Overall, the Pilgrim is just kind of a solid class. He doesn't really seem to be bringing too much to the table that you wouldn't just have naturally in the game. I think he's solid, just nothing special. I'm going to be giving him a B tier. Next up, we have the Charming Rogue, who of course specializes not in stealth, but in combat. In terms of attributes, you have personality and speed, which is a pretty solid combination. Moving faster and getting more money and talking to people easier is handy enough, especially for those of you who are speedrunner minding out there. In terms of skills, you have alchemy, athletics, blade, block, illusion, light armor, and mercantile. This is a solid enough spread. You can use alchemy to really power up those blade weapons. Athletics means you'll be getting around places much quicker, and with your higher speed, you'll be blazing fast across the map in no time flat. Block is of course just always useful to keep yourself safe, especially if you're only using light armor. Illusion is handy to dodge combats or enemies you don't want to deal with, alongside of course the classic slap them with paralysis. Light armor is just, again, solid for a little bit of extra defense without slowing you down too much, and mercantile is good so you're getting the best value, especially out of those stingy, high-skilled merchants, who will often be robbing you for something like 30% of your value. This will make it easier to haggle up to, say, 50 or 60%, and eventually 100, so you'll be selling and buying for their full value. Overall, I think the Rogue is a solid enough personality-type class, and I'll be giving him an A tier. Next up, we have the Scout, who specializes in combat. His attributes are endurance and speed, so he's going to have a lot more health, and he will be moving much quicker, much faster than other classes. In terms of skills, you have acrobatics and athletics, the two classic speed families, which are not bad at all to have as major skills. Alchemy, armor, blade, block, and light armor is pretty standard fare. Blade means you'll be attacking quite quickly. Alchemy allows you to make a lot of things like powerful poisons, which can be very useful, and can even make up for your lack of magic through using things like poisons of paralysis. And block is, of course, just useful to reduce incoming damage. There's not too much to say about Scout. He's very similar to a lot of the other light armor classes, though I will say I think he's significantly less flexible than something like the Archer, but still quite solid. I'm going to be putting him with the Nightblade and the Agent, so I think all these classes fulfill quite similar roles. Next up, we have the Sorcerer, who specializes in magic. His attributes are endurance and intelligence. Nice for a mage to be a little tougher than usual. The intelligence, of course, grants extra magicka. In terms of skills, you have alchemy, alteration, conjuration, destruction, heavy armor, mysticism, and restoration. So while you lack any sort of direct combat skill, you of course specialize in pretty much every way you can use magic, excluding illusion. Which is a shame, as illusion is quite powerful, and I'd usually take it over something like mysticism, which, while a solid skill tree, is mainly only used for soul trapping, at least in my experience. This will just make a tankier wizard, so if you like being a mage but you want to be a little bit tougher than your average squishy man, or don't want to lean too much on paralysis, then I think the Sorcerer is a completely solid option. I'd probably put him closer to A tier just because of the reduced spell efficiency, but overall I'd still say he's still quite a solid class. Next you have the Spell Sword, the halfway house between a knight and a wizard. He's of course has endurance and willpower, which is a nice combo as you'll have a lot of health and stamina, as well as having your magic regen faster. In terms of skills, you have alteration, always useful for bypassing security, and using, of course, increased damage reduction. Blade and block is just a good combo. Blade attacks quite quickly, and block will keep you safe, and make the most out of those big staggers your enemies will get after hitting you, because you'll be able to slice them to pieces with your blade. Heavy armor, destruction, illusion, and restoration are all quite solid combinations. Illusion, again, allows you to smack enemies with paralysis if they're too much for you to block. Destruction allows you to smack enemies at range with big damage over time effects. And restoration allows you to stay healthy in the fight for much longer. With all the DLCs included, you can even get restoration spells just pre-made if you don't want to go to Frostcrag Spire or the Arcane University to restore both your health and your fatigue, which is a very powerful combo. Overall, I think the Spell Sword is a very solid class. Even though he doesn't specialize in conjuration, I think you would get pretty far with just these skills alone, as they allow you to do just about everything. I'd probably place him right around the Sorcerer. I'm not sure which of these I like more, it really could go either way. I think I would give it to the Spell Sword just because I prefer having something a little extra to fight with, which is nice just having Blade on hand. Next up we have the Thief, who specializes of course in stealth. With agility and speed he will have a little bit more stamina, move a lot faster, and deal significantly more damage with things like daggers, short swords, and bows and arrows. The skills are Acrobatics, Light Armor, Marksman, Mercantile, Security, Sneak, and Speechcraft. Everything you need to be a sneaky little thief. And given how fun the Thieves Guild questline is in Oblivion, this is definitely valid for just doing that alone, though you don't need to take that, of course. You'll get quite far just having the extra speed and ability to jump. Light Armor doesn't slow you down much at all, which is very good. Having higher security is nice just to make that lockpicking minigame a bit easier. And of course, Marksman is just very powerful for how fun it is and how good it is with Sneak. Overall, I'd say the Thief is just a very solid stealth class. A lot of the stealth classes sort of blur together since they tend to have the same 4 or 5 skills and only vary in the last 2. I'm going to be putting this guy around the Agent just because the two are so very similar. Just swapping out more for speed instead of personality, which I prefer, so I'll put the Thief over the Agent. Next up we have the Warrior, your classic fighter. This guy is specialized in combat. Endurance and strength are his main stats, so he'll be doing more damage with big weapons, and also be much tankier with more health. In terms of skills, armor is great, as this guy will be taking a lot of hits, so being able to repair his armor for free is essential, so you're not constantly running out of money. Athletics is great because that heavy armor will slow you down, but with high enough athletics you will be still moving at the speed of a speeding bullet. Blade, Block, and Blunt is the trifecta of being able to do just about anything in melee, and hand-to-hand rounds that trio into a quartet to make this guy the king of melee combat. Heavy armor is very nice. This guy has no specializations in magic, and given that he is of course going with mainly direct damage instead of magic, it will be a little tougher for him to compete with someone like the Knight, who in a lot of ways seems like a superior class. I still think this guy is solid enough, and I will be putting him up in S tier, but I'm also just going to put him alongside the Archer. The Archer is better if you want to go light armor, and then the Warrior is better if you want to go for heavy armor. Well, these classes sort of blend the best of magic and combat usually. And finally, we have the Witch Hunter, which despite its name is actually not so much of a hunter of witches as he is a magical hunter. His specialization is magic, his attributes are agility and intelligence, so he will have more stamina and more magicka. He specializes in alchemy, athletics, conjuration, destruction, marksman, mysticism, and security. This is a pretty solid spread covering most of the combat classes of magic and mysticism for keeping your enchanted weapons going. Security is always a handy one to have. I'd say this guy is a solid enough magic sneak man, but overall I'd probably put him at below the other sort of magical stealth class, which would of course be the Shadow Blade. So here's the ranking. Really, the only class I'd say is sort of flat out bad is just the Assassin, who really just needs to swap out one skill for another magic skill to make that intelligence attribute really worth it, as you won't be using your magicka almost at all with the skills he has laid out. But all the rest of these classes all have very solid use cases, and I think are all quite strong. Maybe with the exception of these bottom 3, which are a bit more niche, but useful if you want to play a different kind of character. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you don't use these classes, tell me how you build your custom classes down below. I tend to build custom classes myself, but that's a much harder thing to quantify, and I've also been playing Oblivion for a very long time. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.